I'm Paul Clemens. I'm teaching a signature course called Famous Trials, and we're going to look globally and historically about how rights and justice have played themselves out in court cases that are of wide general attention and interest. One of the questions that students should ask when they come in is, what is justice? And part of what I want to get the students to think about is the way that term is used in American society and globally. What I'm trying to shake up are ideas about rights and ideas about justice. I think those are the two most important concepts that run through the entire course. One of the things I'm doing is thinking in this signature course about the way in which American trials and American justice plays itself out in other nations, and parallels are not always the same, but give you a chance to think in global terms, which I think is very important for students in the 21st century. It also allows students to think about things that have happened in the past which have some sort of reflection in the present. My own sense today is that students have a much better sense of what we might call procedural law just because of what they've been watching on television. And so they have an idea of how it ought to act, at least, even if that isn't the way it actually acts. They generally have a pretty good idea about American criminal and civil law. They have much less of a sense of how different other legal systems are and how different legal systems were in the past. Part of what I have to do when we go back into those cases which are famous trials is recreate for them a legal world that doesn't exist today. What makes them famous? Partly it's the contemporary attention that they got that lets people call them the trial of the century or the murder trial of the century or the trial of the decade or however it is. Partly it's the long-term significance. Those are somewhat different things, like the Lindbergh kidnapping, which people thought were as important as anything that happened during that period of time. And yet today, they don't have a lot of legal significance, and they only have a very small, what we might call celebrity significance to them. When you look at the past and try to bring it into the present, on the one hand, you are going to find parallels, and we're going to do that. We're going to talk about those parallels. On the other hand, you're going to find differences, and we're going to talk about differences. And we're going to use them to illustrate the way cultures deal with rights over time and how those cultures change their attitudes towards rights. We're also going to look at some enduring central problems in the definition of rights, which were as true in the 17th century or even the 15th century as they are true today. And we'll definitely raise this question throughout the course of what rights are is a very contested question. There are concepts of rights which we hold dear in American society, or most people do, which aren't necessarily the same concepts of rights in other societies. One of the goals of the course will get students to think about those concepts and challenge them in some cases and see how specific they are to other sorts of historical circumstances and maybe reevaluate them. One of the goals for me in teaching a signature course on famous trials is to give the students as much opportunity as possible to reach some judgments about these trials on their own. So I'm not going to give you an answer to what is justice. That's something that the students themselves are going to come up with over the course, and very likely that's something that I'll ask them to write about at some point in time. But I want them to think about it in a context which says different societies think of that term in different ways. One of the challenges that they're going to face over the course of their lives is to come to terms with an increasingly troubled world for all sorts of reasons that they're probably very aware of. Being able to think critically about rights and about justice will be one very good takeaway from a course like this, because those are going to be problems that are going to come up in that troubled world that they're going to live through.